Ah, mes amis, tonight we drift into a city of lanterns and lingering whispers, where water carries reflections, and sometimes it carries secrets too. A canal lies beneath a starlit sky, beautiful enough to make you forget how easily darkness can hide within beauty. But when blood appears where only moonlight should dance, the calm surface becomes a mirror of something far more troubling. And so, Hercule Poirot finds himself summoned to a place where every smile conceals an agenda, every gondola ride has an audience, and every ripple seems to say, "You are being watched. Settle in and listen closely, because in this story, the canal remembers everything." Chapter 1: The Night the Water Turned Red. The canal was at its loveliest when the stars came out. By day, it belonged to the practical, deliveries and footsteps, merchants and tourists, the steady hum of commerce. But at night, the city softened. The lanterns along the water burned with a golden hush, turning the canal into a ribbon of light. Voices dropped into murmurs, music drifted from somewhere unseen, strings and breath, the kind of melody that made strangers believe in romance. On the night it happened, the sky was unusually clear. The stars hung sharp above the rooftops, as though the heavens were watching with pointed interest. A narrow boat cut through the canal with minimal sound. It was not a gondola, not a tourist's indulgence. It was a sleek private craft, guided with practiced ease. In the stern sat a man whose confidence felt as carefully curated as his expensive coat. Luca Varini was the kind of man who looked as if he belonged to the city's finest corners, tailored, polished, and unhurried. A silk scarf rested at his throat, but even it seemed to be worn with intention. Those who knew him called him charming. Those who had dealt with him more closely used other words. The boat stopped at a private landing beside an old palazzo whose stone steps descended directly into the canal. A single lantern burned above the doorway. Two figures waited, a driver in a dark cap and a woman wrapped in a pale shawl. Luca stepped out and offered the woman a smile. "You are late," she said, but there was no real anger in it, only impatience. "I am never late," Luca replied. "I arrive precisely when the world is ready for me." The woman's eyes flicked toward the canal. "The world is ready to forget you tonight, Luca. That would be best for both of us." He laughed softly and climbed the steps. Inside the palazzo, the air smelled of old stone, polished wood, and perfume. The entry hall was narrow and tall, lined with mirrors that turned a single lantern into a dozen. Luca glanced at his reflection with approval. The woman, Isabella Moretti, closed the door behind them and lowered her voice. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, "not after what you said in public." "What I said was truth," Luca replied. "And truth has a habit of making cowards uncomfortable." Isabella's jaw tightened. "Truth is not always safe." Luca followed her into a sitting room where the curtains were drawn and the furniture looked chosen for appearances rather than comfort. A glass decanter sat on a tray beside two crystal tumblers. Isabella poured with a steady hand that did not match her eyes. Her eyes were nervous. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Luca accepted the drink without thanks. "I want what you promised." "I promised nothing." "You promised everything," Luca corrected, as though explaining arithmetic. "When you asked me to keep your secret," Isabella stiffened. "Lower your voice." "Aye," Luca said, savoring the reaction. "So the secret is still alive." For a moment the room was still. Only the distant lapping of water outside suggested the world continued. Isabella moved closer, her voice a careful blade. "If you think blackmail will work on me, you underestimate how far I will go to protect what matters." Luca raised his glass. "And you underestimate how far I have already gone." He set the tumbler down and removed something from his inner pocket. A folded letter, slightly worn at the edges. He laid it on the table as though presenting a winning card. Isabella did not touch it. She stared as if the paper might bite. "Where did you get that?" she breathed. Luca smiled. "A friend of a friend. Everyone has friends in a city like this." Isabella's face lost color. "That letter," Luca said softly, "is inconvenient. It makes certain timelines questionable. It makes certain inheritances fragile." Her hands trembled, just once, before she forced them still. "You want money," she said. "No," Luca replied. "Money is common. I want something better." He leaned forward. "I want influence, access, a seat at your table." Isabella's eyes narrowed. You want to be seen beside me. I want to be protected by you, Luca corrected. Protected and rewarded. You have a name, I have information. Together we are unstoppable. Isabella let out a bitter laugh. You are delusional. Luca's expression hardened. I am prepared. Isabella stared at him as though measuring him for the first time, seeing not charm but hunger. Then she did something odd. She smiled, a small smile, calm, almost warm. Very well, she said. If you want a seat at my table, we should speak like civilized people. Come, there is someone you should meet. Luca blinked. Someone. Isabella moved toward a side door. A guest, a man of reputation. If you are going to demand a future in this city, you should understand the kind of minds who shape it. Luca hesitated, suspicion flickering. Are you stalling? He asked. Isabella glanced back, still smiling. Perhaps I am educating you. She opened the side door and led him down a short corridor toward a smaller private room. The palazzo's walls were thick. The air grew cooler with each step. Somewhere nearby, water gurgled through old stone channels, like a throat clearing in the dark. At the end of the corridor was a door with a brass handle polished to brightness. Isabella turned. One thing, Luca. Please, do not be theatrical, he scoffed. Theatricality is for those who fear being ignored. Isabella opened the door. The room inside was dim, lit by a single lamp. A man sat in an armchair with perfect stillness, hands folded neatly over a cane. His moustache was unmistakable. His eyes were alert, observant, and faintly amused, as though he had been waiting for precisely this scene. Luca stopped. Isabella said softly, Monsieur Poirot. Hercule Poirot rose, inclining his head. Bonsoir, he said. You are Monsieur Varini, yes? The man who believes he can purchase safety with threats. Luca's pulse quickened. Who are you to judge me? Poirot smiled politely. I am merely a man who observes, and I observe, monsieur, that your confidence is performative. Luca stepped forward, anger rising. Isabella, what is this? Isabella's smile had vanished. Her eyes were hard now. This, she said, is my attempt to end this without scandal. Poirot's voice remained gentle. You see, Monsieur Varini, I have been asked to ensure that certain misunderstandings do not become catastrophes. Luca's gaze darted between them. So you are here to intimidate me? Poirot shook his head. Non, I am here to understand. He gestured to a chair. Sit, if you please. Luca did not sit. I will not be managed like a child, Poirot sighed as though disappointed. Very well, then perhaps you will listen standing. He took a small notebook from his pocket. You have made enemies, Monsieur Varini. Many. You are careless with your words, careless with your pride. Luca's hands curled into fists. You cannot threaten me. Poirot's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. I do not threaten, he said. I warn. Isabella stepped closer. Luca, give me the letter. No, Luca spat. Poirot watched Luca's face carefully, then asked softly, Why do you come at night, monsieur? Why not in daylight where the law can see you? Luca opened his mouth to answer, and the lamp flickered, just once. Then again, a faint sound echoed from the corridor behind them. A footstep. Luca turned sharply. Who is there? Isabella's eyes widened. No one should be. The door behind them creaked. Poirot's posture changed, subtle, immediate, his gaze fixed on the widening gap. A shadow filled the doorway, and before Luca could move, something glinted in the lamplight. A sudden strike, quick, precise. Luca gasped. His hand went to his chest. Red spread across his coat, blooming like a terrible flower. He staggered backward, eyes wide with disbelief. Poirot stepped forward, catching him before he fell. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered. Luca's lips moved soundlessly. Then, with a final shudder, his body went limp. Isabella let out a strangled cry. In the next heartbeat, the shadow vanished back into the corridor, the door slamming shut. Poirot straightened, his face grim. He looked down at the blood staining Luca's coat, then toward the dark corridor, and then he said very quietly, This was not meant to be seen. Outside, the canal continued to shimmer under the starlight, peaceful, indifferent. But somewhere beneath that beauty, the city's secrets had just become heavier. And the water, Poirot knew, would soon carry the truth to the surface. Chapter 2 possibly burns something, leaves no trace. Poirot nodded. And strikes with precision, not rage. Renier frowned. That means motive is not emotion, it's protection. Isabella flinched. Poirot watched her carefully. Who benefits most if that letter disappears forever? Isabella swallowed. My family, Renier's eyes sharpened. Then your family becomes our first circle of interest. A faint sound from below drifted up through the window, oars in water, a distant voice, life continuing outside, oblivious. Poirot stepped to the window and looked down at the canal. A small boat glided past, lantern light trembling on its surface. For a second, Poirot's gaze caught a detail, a hand on the oar, adorned with something that flashed briefly. A ring. Poirot's expression did not change, but his mind snapped to attention. Was it merely coincidence, or had the canal just shown him the first real clue? He turned back to Renier. Inspector, Poirot said softly, I think the killer may not have escaped far. In this city the water is a road, and roads leave traces. Renier frowned. You saw something. Poirot nodded once. A boatman, a ring. Renier gestured sharply to his men. Seal the landing. No boats leave without check. Move. The officers rushed out. Isabella stared at Poirot, fear and hope tangled in her eyes. You think you can find who did this? Poirot looked down at Luca's lifeless face. I will, he said quietly, because the killer did not only kill a man tonight, they tried to kill the truth as well. Outside the stars still glittered, but now the starlit canal held a darker reflection, one that would not vanish until Poirot forced it into daylight. Chapter 3, The Ring That Shone Too Brightly. The city did not wake so much as it resumed. At dawn, mist hovered low over the canal like breath held in suspense. The lanterns that had glowed so warmly at night now seemed tired, their reflections on the water fading into pale streaks. Fishermen moved quietly, and early shopkeepers lifted shutters with the slow rhythm of routine, unaware that, a few streets away, death had already rewritten the day. On the private landing behind the palazzo, Inspector Renier's men worked with brisk efficiency. One constable blocked the narrow canal passage with a small police skiff, while another questioned boatmen, his voice sharp and impatient. The usual morning traffic, delivery boats, cleaners, and a couple of gondoliers hoping for early tourists, had been forced to wait in a tight cluster, grumbling softly, their faces turned toward the palazzo with curiosity. Poirot stood on the top step, hands clasped, watching it all with mild disapproval. Chaos, he murmured. It is always noisy when it believes it is being useful. Inspector Renier approached, coat collar up against the chill, eyes ringed with sleepless irritation. You said a ring, Renier began. A boatman with a ring. That's your miracle clue? Poirot smiled politely. Not a miracle, Inspector. An observation. Renier gestured toward the canal traffic. Half the men in this city wear rings. Some wear two. Some wear enough gold to finance a small war. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. And yet, not every ring is the same, Renier exhaled. All right, describe it. Poirot leaned slightly toward him. It flashed in the lantern light. A broad band, not thin, the stone, dark, perhaps onyx, and in the center, an emblem, a raised shape like a crest. Renier frowned. You saw all that in 1 second. Poirot's smile deepened. Inspector, the eyes are not the problem, the mind is. Renier stared at him, then turned sharply to a constable. Bring me the boatmen, one by one. Within minutes, the first gondolier was led forward, a young man with eager eyes and a moustache that looked glued on in imitation of romance. What were you doing near the palazzo last night? Renier demanded. The gondolier shrugged. Tourists, late tourists. They like the stars. Did you see anyone leave? Renier asked. No, signore. Poirot studied his hands. No ring. The second man was older, his skin weathered by water and sun. He wore a gold band on his left hand, plain and scratched. Poirot tilted his head. Not this one, Renier grunted and waved him away. A third boatman stepped forward, nervous, glancing at the police skiff as if calculating escape. He wore a thick ring, but the stone was bright red like garnet. Poirot's gaze lingered briefly. No, Renier's irritation grew. This is pointless. We should be searching the palazzo, interrogating the staff. Poirot raised a finger gently. Patience, Inspector. When you chase too hard, the truth runs. Renier opened his mouth to snap back. Then a new boat glided into view from the far bend. It moved slowly, almost lazily, as if it belonged to the canal itself and resented being questioned. The boatman guiding it was neither young nor old, perhaps mid-40s, with calm eyes and a face shaped by discipline. His cap was pulled low, his posture was relaxed but not careless, and on his right hand, gripping the oar, was a broad ring with a dark stone. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "There," he said quietly. Renier's head snapped toward the boat. "Stop him!" The police skiff moved to block the boat's path. The boatman slowed, expression unchanged, as if he had expected this. Renier stepped to the edge of the landing. "You! Bring the boat in!" The boatman complied without protest. He stepped onto the landing with steady balance, then lifted his hands slightly to show he carried no weapon. Renier's gaze went straight to the ring. "Where were you last night?" The man's voice was calm. "On the water." "That's not an answer." "It is the only honest one," the man replied. Renier bristled. "Name?" "Matteo," the boatman said. "Matteo Risi." Poirot studied him carefully, his eyes, his mouth, the way he stood. There was something in Matteo's calm that did not feel innocent, but it also did not feel guilty in the way most criminals were guilty. It felt trained. Poirot spoke gently. "Monsieur Rizzi, your ring is most interesting." Matteo glanced at it, then back at Poirot. "It was a gift." "A gift from whom?" Poirot asked. Matteo's expression did not change. "From someone who wanted me to remember my place." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, that is not a gift. That is a collar." Renier stepped forward. "Enough talk. You were seen near the palazzo last night." Matteo shrugged. "Many boats pass that palazzo." Poirot's voice remained soft. "But not many boats stop there at midnight without a client." Matteo's eyes flickered, just once, toward the water. Poirot noted it immediately. "Inspector," Poirot said, "may we speak with Monsieur Rizzi privately, without your volume?" Renier snorted, but after a moment he waved his constables back. "5 minutes," he growled. "Then I arrest him." Poirot gestured gently. Matteo followed him a few steps away from the others. Near a stone pillar where the sound of water muffled voices, Poirot leaned in slightly. "Monsieur Rizzi, you are not a common gondolier." Matteo's jaw tightened. "I am a man who rows a boat." Poirot nodded. "And yet your hands, calloused in the wrong places, your stance, ready to move quickly. You have training." Matteo's gaze hardened. "Careful, little man." Poirot smiled. "Threats are for those who lack persuasion." He nodded toward the ring. "That emblem, does it belong to the Moretti family?" Matteo did not answer immediately. Poirot continued, voice quieter. "Last night a man died in that palazzo. The killer entered unseen, struck once and vanished. Such efficiency requires either great luck or preparation." Matteo's eyes remained calm, but his breathing changed slightly, barely perceptible. Poirot saw it. "You were there," Poirot said softly. Matteo's lips curved into something like a smile, but without warmth. "If I were, would you have proof?" Poirot met his gaze. "Not yet." Matteo shrugged. "Then you have nothing." Poirot's eyes shifted to the canal again. "The canal is a road," he said. "Roads have traffic. Traffic has witnesses. You were seen." Matteo tilted his head. "Seen by you?" Poirot nodded. "And by the table in the room where Luca died." Matteo's expression flickered, tiny, almost imperceptible. Poirot pressed gently. "A ring imprint was found near where the letter lay, a ring like yours." Matteo stared at Poirot, eyes suddenly colder. "That ring could be anyone's," he said. Poirot nodded. "If it were a plain band, yes, but yours has a raised crest." Matteo's jaw clenched. Poirot lowered his voice further. "Tell me, Monsieur Rizzi, why did you take the letter?" Matteo's eyes flashed with a hint of anger. "Because it never should have existed." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Ah, so the letter threatened someone." Matteo looked away. Poirot continued. It threatens Isabella Moretti? Matteo said nothing. Poirot sighed. Then it threatens the family name. Matteo's voice was quiet, controlled. Names are not just words, they are shields. And shields, Poirot murmured, are often used to hide knives. A sudden commotion erupted behind them. Renier's constables were shouting. Someone had pointed toward the water. Poirot turned. Matteo's boat was moving, without a boatman. It drifted away from the landing slowly, as if pushed by an unseen hand. Renier's eyes widened. What the? Poirot's gaze snapped to Matteo. Matteo smiled faintly. It seems, he said, the canal has its own opinions. Renier lunged forward, grabbing Matteo's arm. You're coming with me. Matteo did not resist, not physically, but his eyes met Poirot's with a calm certainty that chilled. You think you're close, Matteo said quietly. You're not. Poirot's voice remained gentle. And yet you are afraid. Matteo laughed softly. Of you? No. Poirot shook his head. Not of me. Of what happens if the truth reaches daylight. Renier dragged Matteo away toward the waiting officers. Poirot watched him go, mind racing, the ring, the emblem, the boat drifting away deliberately as distraction. Someone else, somewhere nearby, had pushed it, an accomplice. Poirot turned back toward the palazzo. Inside, Isabella was likely surrounded by her family now, panic polished into politeness, scandal disguised as concern, and somewhere within those marble halls, the missing letter sat hidden like a loaded pistol. Poirot whispered to himself, We must find the letter, because in that letter was not only a secret of birth, there was a reason someone killed for it, and Poirot had begun to suspect something far worse than inheritance. A secret that could destroy the living, and perhaps explain why Luca Verini had died so quickly, so cleanly, as though he were merely a nuisance in someone else's plan. Chapter 4. The Palazzo. Of polished lies, the Moretti Palazzo looked different in daylight. At night it was romance, lamplight and reflections, an elegant shell perched above the canal like a jewel resting on velvet. By morning the stone felt colder, the windows more watchful, the carved balconies less charming and more severe. The city's beauty remained, of course, but now it was the beauty of a place that had learned how to hide inconvenience behind architecture. Poirot arrived shortly after 10 o'clock. A pair of uniformed officers remained at the landing. Their presence meant to discourage curiosity, but curiosity in a city like this was a currency. People spent it freely. Inside, the palazzo had been rearranged, not physically, not yet, but emotionally. The household moved with the careful choreography of those who understood scandal. Servants avoided eye contact, curtains were drawn at angles that allowed light but blocked sightlines from neighboring windows. The sitting room where Luca Verini died smelled faintly of lavender now, as if perfume could erase blood. Isabella Moretti met Poirot at the foot of the grand staircase. She looked composed, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Her pale shawl had been replaced by a more formal garment. A tailored jacket with a high collar that made her appear taller, stronger, yet her fingers, interlaced tightly, told another story. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly, my family is here. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Of course, in families, disaster is like a dinner bell. Isabella's lips twitched, almost a smile. They are not pleased, Poirot inclined his head. Displeasure is understandable. Murder is messy, it stains. Isabella turned and led him up the staircase. Their footsteps echoed through marble halls lined with oil paintings. Faces stared down, more Morettis than Poirot cared to count, each expression carefully dignified, as if embarrassment had been bred out of them. At the top, a double door stood open. Inside, the family waited. There were 3 of them in the drawing room, positioned like pieces on a chessboard. Closest to the window stood Signor Vittorio Moretti, Isabella's father, a handsome man in his late 50s with silver at his temples and the tired arrogance of someone who had spent a lifetime being obeyed. His suit was immaculate, his expression not angry but offended, as if the world had broken a rule by bringing murder into his house. Near the fireplace sat Signora Bianca Moretti, Isabella's mother, elegant, pale, eyes sharp as glass. She held a teacup she did not drink from. Her gaze cut to Poirot's moustache, lingered with faint contempt, then moved on. And in an armchair slightly apart from them sat an elderly woman wrapped in a dark shawl, Chiara Moretti, Isabella's grandmother. Her face was lined like old parchment, but her eyes were alert, almost luminous. The atmosphere around her felt heavier, as if the room itself respected her. Poirot stepped inside with perfect politeness. "Buongiorno," he said. "I regret we meet under such unpleasant circumstances." Vittorio did not offer a hand. "We do not require your regret, monsieur. We require your discretion." Poirot smiled faintly. "Discretion is a luxury purchased by innocence." Bianca's eyes narrowed. "Are you here to accuse us?" Poirot tilted his head. "I am here to understand what your family wishes to hide." A silence fell, sharp and immediate. Isabella's shoulders tensed. "Monsieur," Poirot lifted a hand gently, "Mademoiselle Isabella asked for my assistance because she feared blackmail. Now there is murder. The stakes have changed." Vittorio's voice was cold. "My daughter should not have involved you." Poirot nodded. "Perhaps, but she did, and now we must deal with consequences." Chiara Moretti spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but strong. "The canal took a life," she said. "It has done so before." Poirot turned to her, intrigued. "Ah, madam, you speak as though you remember many things." Chiara's lips curved slightly. "I remember what matters." Poirot took a step closer. "Then perhaps you remember a letter." Bianca stiffened. Vittorio's jaw tightened. Isabella's breath caught. Poirot continued softly. "A letter written long ago, a letter that threatens the structure of this family, a letter Luca Varini possessed last night and which is now missing." Vittorio's voice sharpened. "That letter does not exist." Poirot smiled. "The dead man would disagree." Bianca set her cup down with a soft click. "This is nonsense. The police have already questioned the staff. No letter was found." Poirot nodded. "Because it was taken." Vittorio stepped forward, anger finally cracking his composure. "Do you insinuate that someone in this family killed Luca Varini?" Poirot's eyes remained calm. "I insinuate nothing. I observe that your family has more motive than most strangers." Isabella spoke quickly, trying to keep the room from igniting. "Luca forced his way into our affairs. He threatened us." Poirot turned to her gently. "Yes, mademoiselle. And you brought him here at night, into a sealed room, with me." Isabella flinched. "I thought—" Poirot's gaze softened slightly. "You thought you could manage it. Many people think that until blood appears." Chiara's eyes flicked toward Isabella, and for a moment Poirot saw something there, approval mixed with warning. Poirot decided to press where silence lived. "Madame Chiara," he said, "this letter, did you write it, or did someone write it to you?" Bianca's face tightened. "Monsieur Poirot, that is inappropriate." Poirot turned to her. "Madam, murder is inappropriate. Questions are merely uncomfortable." Vittorio's voice turned dangerous. "We will not be interrogated in our own home." Poirot nodded. "Then let us speak as civilized people." He took out his notebook and opened it. "Last night," he said, "a killer entered a small room in this palazzo. They struck once with precision, then vanished. They took or destroyed a letter. A ring imprint was found on the table, and this morning we detained a boatman, Matteo Rizzi, wearing a ring bearing a crest." Vittorio's eyes shifted just slightly to Chiara. Poirot noticed. Bianca noticed too, and her expression sharpened further, as though she was silently warning Vittorio not to reveal anything with his face. Poirot continued, voice smooth. "The crest on that ring," he said, "resembles a family emblem." Vittorio's jaw tightened. "Many crests resemble each other." Poirot nodded. "Yes, but some crests are worn only by those who serve." Chiara's eyes gleamed. "Serve," she repeated softly. "Like guards." Poirot inclined his head. "Exactly." Isabella's eyes widened. "Matteo isn't just a boatman." Poirot looked at her gently. "I think Matteo is many things, and one of them is loyal to someone." Bianca's voice was sharp. "This is absurd. My family does not employ criminals." Poirot's expression remained polite. "Madame, In wealthy families, criminals are often called something else. Vittorio slammed his hand lightly against the side table, making the decanter rattle. Enough! If you have accusations, take them to the police. Poirot nodded. Inspector Renier already has them. That landed. The air in the room seemed to harden. Chiara shifted in her chair, fingers tightening around her shawl. She looked suddenly older, as if the mention of the police had pulled her back decades. Poirot turned his attention to Chiara, fully now. Madame, he said softly, in my experience, the oldest secrets are protected by the oldest loyalties. Chiara studied him. You think I am the secret? Poirot smiled gently. No, I think you know where the secret is kept. Bianca's face went pale. Mama! Chiara lifted a hand, silencing her. Poirot leaned in slightly. The letter! Where is it now? Chiara's eyes held his. For a moment Poirot thought she might refuse out of pride. Then she said quietly, It should have burned. Isabella inhaled sharply. Grandmother, Chiara's voice remained calm. Some truths are not meant to survive. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And yet it did survive long enough to cause murder. Vittorio's shoulders sagged slightly, the first sign of fatigue. What do you want, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot's answer was simple. I want the letter. Bianca snapped. Why? So the newspapers can feast on it, so the city can laugh. Poirot shook his head. No, so the killer cannot use it again. Chiara's gaze narrowed. Again? Poirot nodded. Yes, because Luca was not killed only because he threatened you. He was killed because someone else wanted control of that letter. A person who believes secrets are weapons. Isabella's voice was thin. You think Luca wasn't the only blackmailer. Poirot met her eyes. Exactly. A long silence settled. Then Chiara's eyes drifted toward the bookshelf behind Vittorio. It was a small movement, barely a shift. But Poirot's mind caught it like a hook. Poirot walked slowly toward that shelf. Bianca stiffened. Do not, Poirot raised a finger. Please, no sudden movements. He examined the books, thick volumes of history, a few novels, a row of ledgers with dates embossed in gold. Poirot ran his fingertip along the top edge. Dust on most, no dust on one. He pulled the dustless ledger outward. Behind it, hidden in the shadow gap, was a narrow compartment. Poirot reached in carefully and withdrew a folded envelope, aged and yellowed, sealed with an old wax stamp. Isabella gasped. It's real? Vittorio's face turned ashen. Bianca's lips parted, but no sound came. Chiara closed her eyes, briefly, as though acknowledging a defeat she had always known would come. Poirot held the envelope, but did not open it. Now, he said softly, we have what the killer wanted. Isabella stepped closer, trembling. What does it say? Poirot's gaze remained steady. It says something that has already killed once. From the corridor outside, a faint sound echoed, a soft, deliberate footstep. Poirot's eyes flicked to the door, then to Chiara, then to the letter, and he understood. The killer had not finished, because as long as the letter existed, everyone in this palazzo was a target, either to protect it or to destroy it. Poirot lowered his voice to a whisper. Do not move, he said. Someone is listening. Chapter 5. The footstep in the corridor. The footstep came again, soft, deliberate, not the hurried shuffle of a servant rushing to correct a mistake, nor the heavy tread of a policeman accustomed to announcing his authority. This was measured, almost courteous, like someone who believed the house belonged to them. Poirot held the sealed envelope in one hand without moving. In that moment, the letter was no longer paper, it was a blade, quiet, sharp, and capable of cutting every relationship in the room. Do not move, he repeated, voice barely above a breath. The Moretti family obeyed, though not out of trust, out of instinct. Isabella's fingers hovered near her collarbone, as if she might physically hold her own heartbeat. Vittorio's eyes were fixed on the door. Bianca's lips trembled, but she forced them still. Chiara remained calm, yet her shawl tightened around her shoulders like armor. Poirot's gaze stayed on the doorway. A shadow passed across the frosted glass panel. Then the door handle turned. Slowly, the door opened. Mrs. Galley, the housekeeper, stepped inside carrying a silver tray with a pot of tea. Her face was neutral, carefully composed. The moment she saw the frozen expressions in the room, something flickered in her eyes. Too quick to be fear, too controlled to be innocence. Signore, she said softly. I brought— Poirot lifted a hand. Madame, you are most punctual. Mrs. Galley froze. Monsieur? Poirot smiled gently. It is the tea you bring, or is it an excuse to see what has been discovered? The tray trembled. Barely, Bianca snapped. How dare you speak to staff like that? Poirot's gaze never left Mrs. Galley. Madame Bianca, staff are often the only people who truly see. Mrs. Galley swallowed. I do not understand. Poirot took a step forward. Last night someone entered a sealed room and killed Luca Verini. That person moved like someone familiar with this palazzo, someone who knew which doors did not creak, which corridors were least watched, which rooms had listening walls. Mrs. Galley's fingers tightened around the tray edge. Poirot continued softly. And just now, when I found the letter behind the bookshelf, someone in the corridor walked as if they expected to arrive before a decision was made. Chiara's voice cut through the tension. Enough. Poirot turned to her politely. Madame? Chiara's eyes were on Mrs. Galley. Leave us. Mrs. Galley hesitated a fraction of a second too long. Then she nodded and withdrew, closing the door carefully behind her, as though controlling sound itself. As soon as the latch clicked, Isabella exhaled shakily. You think she is involved? Poirot looked thoughtful. Involved, perhaps, but not necessarily guilty. Vittorio barked. Then who? Poirot held up the letter. Whoever fears this paper most. Bianca's voice turned sharp, desperate. Destroy it, burn it, end this madness. Poirot's eyes cooled slightly. Madame, when the guilty demand destruction, it is rarely because they seek peace. Bianca looked as though she might slap him. Instead, she turned away, clenching her hands. Poirot placed the sealed envelope on the table, flat, visible to all. Now, he said, we will do what murderers hate most. He paused. We will wait. Isabella stared. Wait for what? Poirot nodded toward the corridor. For impatience. Minutes passed, stretched and thin. The palazzo seemed to hold its breath with them. Somewhere below, the water lapped against stone. A clock chimed faintly in another wing. From outside came distant voices, tourists, vendors, the normal pulse of life that did not yet know it was standing on the edge of scandal. Poirot watched faces. Faces lied. Faces betrayed. Faces betrayed even when mouths remained polite. Vittorio Moretti paced once, then forced himself still. Bianca stared at the floor, jaw tight. Chiara's gaze remained fixed on the envelope, as if she could will it to vanish. Isabella kept glancing toward the door with growing dread. Poirot's mind returned to Matteo Rizzi, the boatman with the ring, loyalty, training, the ring imprint on the table, a protector, someone employed not to row a boat, but to erase problems. And now the biggest problem in this palazzo was not Luca's death. It was this letter, lying silently on a polished table. Suddenly, another sound, not a footstep this time, a soft clink, like metal touching glass. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You heard that? Isabella nodded quickly. From the corridor, near the landing. Poirot stood. Inspector Renier's men are outside, yet someone is moving inside. Vittorio's voice was strained. This is madness. Poirot turned to Isabella. Is there a back staircase? Yes, she whispered. From the service corridor. It leads down to the water level. Poirot's expression sharpened. Then someone may attempt to leave by boat. Quickly. He moved to the door, opened it, and stepped into the corridor. The hallway was empty, but the air felt disturbed, like a curtain after someone. Brushes passed it. Poirot walked slowly, eyes scanning the floor, the walls, the corners. He found it near the baseboard, a tiny smear of wetness, not from cleaning, but from a shoe. He followed it. It led toward the service corridor. Poirot's footsteps were almost silent as he moved, his mind alert. The palazzo here was less glamorous. Stone steps worn by generations of workers, narrow doors, shelves stacked with linens, the smell of soap and damp. At the far end, a door stood slightly ajar. Poirot paused, listened. From beyond came the faint creak of wood, a boat plank. Poirot opened the door quietly. He looked down a narrow stairwell leading to the water level. Sunlight from an outside archway spilled in, turning the stone steps pale gold. And below, half hidden by shadow, someone was moving, a figure in dark clothing, carrying something close to their chest. Poirot stepped forward. Stop! The figure froze, then turned. Mrs. Galley, her composure was gone now. Her eyes were wide, her breathing fast. In her hands was a small metal tin, one used for storing documents from damp air. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You took the letter?" Mrs. Galley shook her head. "No, I was trying to protect them." Poirot's voice remained calm. "Madame, protection is often the excuse for theft." She swallowed. "You don't understand. If that letter gets out, the Morettis will fall. And if they fall, many others fall with them." Poirot stepped closer. "Many others?" Her lips trembled. "People with money, people with power, people who do not forgive." Poirot's eyes hardened. "Like Matteo Rizzi?" Mrs. Galley flinched. Poirot nodded slowly. "Ah, so Matteo is not just loyal to the family, he is loyal to something larger." Mrs. Galley's voice broke. "They will kill me if I fail." Poirot's expression softened slightly, not with sympathy, but with understanding of fear. Fear was the universal language of control. "Who told you to retrieve the letter?" Poirot asked gently. Mrs. Galley's eyes darted toward the canal exit. Poirot followed her gaze and saw the glint of something outside, a boat waiting, half hidden beneath an arch. And inside it, seated with calm patience, was a man in a cap. Matteo Rizzi. His onyx ring caught the light like an eye. Poirot's voice dropped. "He is here," Mrs. Galley whispered. "He said he would take it away. He said it would disappear forever." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And do you believe him?" Mrs. Galley's shoulders sagged. "I have no choice." Poirot stepped between her and the stairs. "You have a choice now." From below, Matteo's voice drifted upward, quiet, confident. "Signora Galley," he called, "we are wasting time." Poirot leaned slightly toward the railing. "Monsieur Rizzi, you are persistent." Matteo's reply was smooth. "I am thorough." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You came for the letter." Matteo's voice remained calm. "The letter is dangerous. It must be removed." Poirot smiled faintly. "Dangerous to whom?" "Isabella, or the person who wrote it." A pause. Poirot felt it, the smallest hesitation. And in that hesitation, Poirot learned something crucial. The letter was not only about Isabella's lineage. It was about the writer, or the man connected to the writer. A living person, a powerful person, someone who still had influence over the Morettis and their protectors. Poirot's voice was gentle but sharp. "Monsieur Rizzi, you do not kill for families. You kill for employers." Matteo did not deny it. "Step aside, Poirot." Poirot turned back to Mrs. Galley. "Give me the tin." Her hands shook. Tears formed in her eyes. "If I give it to you, I die." Poirot's expression was steady. "If you give it to him, you die anyway, only sooner." Mrs. Galley stared at him, terrified. Then, in a trembling motion, she extended the tin toward Poirot. Poirot took it carefully. From below, Matteo's voice changed, still calm but colder. "Madame," he said to Mrs. Galley, "you disappoint me." Poirot's gaze hardened. "And you, Monsieur Rizzi, have just revealed yourself." Footsteps echoed above, Renier's men running, alerted by the commotion. Poirot lifted his voice. "Inspector, the canal exit!" Matteo moved. Fast, he pushed off the boat pole, and the craft slid backward into the canal with practiced ease. In one smooth motion, he disappeared beneath the archway's shadow. Renier arrived at the stairwell, breathless, eyes wild. "Where is he?" Poirot pointed. "Gone, by water." Renier swore and signaled his men. "After him, now!" As officers rushed down, Poirot held the tin against his chest like a fragile heart. Isabella appeared at the top of the stairs, face pale. "What happened?" Poirot looked at her, voice calm. "Your palazzo has two problems now, mademoiselle." He lifted the tin slightly. "One is this letter." Then he looked toward the canal, where ripples still moved from Matteo's escape. "And the other is the man who is willing to kill to keep it buried." Chapter 6. The letter Poirot refused to read. Poirot did not open the tin immediately. It was not caution. He had faced too many hidden letters, too many private confessions, too many incriminating pages to be frightened by a seal. It was principle. Once a secret was read, it could never be unread. And in a city where reputations floated as delicately as lantern reflections on water, The truth could drown more than the guilty. He carried the tin upstairs as though it contained something fragile and alive. Isabella waited at the top of the service stairwell, her face tight with anxious questions. Behind her, Vittorio and Bianca appeared, drawn by commotion like moths to flame, and Chiara lingered further back, watching in silence with eyes that seemed to measure the cost of every breath. Inspector Renier returned shortly after, furious and damp from the chase. "He's slipped under the archway," Renier snapped. "We lost him in the side canal. He knows the water like a map." Poirot nodded mildly. "Yes, such men are not hired for poetry." Renier's gaze locked on the tin in Poirot's hands. "Is that it?" Poirot replied calmly. "Yes." Renier reached for it. Poirot moved it back a fraction, just enough to be polite and firm. "Inspector," he said, "you may have custody of the investigation, but this is delicate. If we handle it like a club, it will break in the wrong places." Renier's jaw tightened. "It's evidence." "It is also leverage," Poirot corrected gently. "And leverage, if dropped, lands on the innocent." Isabella spoke quickly. "Monsieur Poirot, what will you do?" Poirot held her gaze. "I will decide who deserves to know what is inside." Bianca bristled. "Who are you to decide?" Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, the closest he came to irritation. "I am the man who was invited to prevent scandal," he said. "Now I am the man trying to prevent murder from becoming a habit." Renier exhaled sharply. "Open it." Poirot shook his head. "Not here, not with so many ears." He turned, walking back toward the study-like sitting room where the family had confronted him earlier. The room was quieter now, though tension still hung like a curtain. Poirot placed the tin on the table and sat opposite it, hands folded. "I will ask questions first," he said. "Then, if necessary, the letter will speak." Vittorio Moretti's patience cracked. "Questions? My home is crawling with police. A man died upstairs. My daughter is being whispered about. And you want to play games?" Poirot's voice remained gentle. "I do not play. I build." He looked at Isabella. When Luca arrived, he came with confidence. Confidence of a man who believed his information made him untouchable. "Why?" Isabella swallowed. "Because he had proof, and he thought we would pay?" Poirot nodded. "But he did not demand only money. He demanded access, influence, a seat." Bianca's lips tightened. "He was a parasite." Poirot looked at her calmly. "Parasites do not walk into palazzos alone, madame. They attach themselves to a host, or to a rumor." He turned to Vittorio. "Who in this city benefits most from the Moretti name remaining untouched?" Vittorio scoffed. "We do, obviously." Poirot shook his head. "Not only you." Chiara's voice drifted in, quiet and firm. "He means patrons." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, patrons. Allies, men who hide behind noble families because the families are shields." Renier's eyes narrowed. "Are you saying someone powerful is behind Matteo?" Poirot nodded slowly. "I suspect it." Renier leaned forward. "Then we drag it out. We interrogate Matteo when we find him." Poirot smiled faintly. "And what if Matteo is not meant to be found?" Silence. Poirot continued, voice soft but precise. "Such men are often disposable. They are employed, used, and then erased by the same hand that paid them." Isabella's face paled. "You think Matteo might be killed too?" Poirot nodded. "If he is captured, yes." Bianca stood abruptly, anger shaking her. "Enough! This is all because of that letter. Destroy it. If it never existed, none of this would—" Poirot lifted a hand. "Madame Bianca, the letter existed long before Luca died. It is not the letter that created danger. It is what your family built around it." Bianca's eyes flashed. "You are insulting us." Poirot's gaze remained calm. "I am describing you." He turned to Chiara, studying her closely. "Madame Chiara, you said it should have burned. Why did you not burn it?" Chiara's eyes did not waver. "Because I was weak." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Or because part of you wanted the truth to remain, just in case." Chiara's mouth tightened slightly. "Sometimes you keep a knife in the drawer not because you plan to use it, but because you fear the day you might need it." Poirot nodded gently. "Exactly." Renier crossed his arms. Open the tin, Poirot. We need something solid. Poirot did not move. Not yet. He glanced toward Isabella. You said the letter was written to your grandmother, from a man with influence. Isabella nodded. Yes. Poirot leaned slightly forward. Is that man still alive? Vittorio's face changed, only a fraction, but Poirot saw it. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Ah! Vittorio's voice was guarded. What are you implying? Poirot's tone remained polite. I imply nothing. I observe that you reacted as though the name still has weight. Isabella's gaze snapped toward her father. Papa? Bianca's voice cut like ice. Do not start, not here. Poirot nodded slowly. So it is true, the man is alive, or his legacy is. Chiara closed her eyes briefly. Poirot spoke softly, almost kindly. Madame, secrets do not age gracefully, they rot. Chiara opened her eyes again. You want a name? Poirot's expression was steady. Yes, Chiara's voice dropped. If I give you that name, you will drag the city's most powerful into this. Poirot nodded. Yes. Chiara's gaze flicked to Isabella. And you will destroy my granddaughter. Poirot's voice softened. Not if we do it correctly, Renier snorted. Correctly, there is a dead man and a missing killer. Poirot turned to him. Inspector, if you charge into a palace, you will meet walls. If you walk in with the right key, the doors open. Renier's face tightened. And your key is the letter. Poirot nodded. Yes. He tapped the tin gently. But I still refuse to read it until I know what kind of trap it is. Many letters are written as weapons, not truths, Isabella whispered. Then how do we proceed? Poirot looked toward the window where the canal glimmered in daylight. We proceed, he said, by understanding who is controlling the water. Later, in a smaller side salon, Poirot spoke with Isabella alone. It had taken persuasion, quiet but firm, to separate her from her parents. Bianca protested, Vittorio sulked, Renier complained, but Poirot insisted. Isabella was at the center. She deserved to speak without family pressure shaping her mouth. In the side salon, sunlight fell across a small table with a vase of white flowers. Their innocence felt almost insulting. Isabella sat, hands clenched. They're hiding something from me. Poirot nodded. Yes, Isabella's voice trembled. My father. He looked afraid. I've never seen him afraid. Poirot's expression softened slightly. Fear reveals power's true owner. Isabella swallowed. What do you think the letter says? Poirot considered. I think it does not merely speak of your grandmother's past. It speaks of a bargain that protected the Morettis and enslaved them. Isabella's eyes widened. A bargain with whom? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked, Tell me about Matteo Rizzi. Have you ever seen him before? Isabella frowned. Not closely, but I've seen boatmen near family events. Security. Men who appear where they shouldn't. Poirot nodded. Men who protect without being thanked. Isabella whispered, You think Matteo belongs to our family? Poirot's gaze sharpened. I think he belongs to your grandmother's past. Isabella's breath caught. To the man who wrote the letter? Poirot nodded gently. Perhaps. A faint sound from the corridor interrupted them. Voices, Renier speaking sharply, a servant responding nervously. Poirot rose, stepping to the door and listening. Renier's voice. Where is it? Where is the tin? Poirot's eyes narrowed. He turned back to Isabella. Stay here, he said quietly. He returned to the main sitting room and froze. The tin was gone. The table where it had rested was bare, as if it had never been there. The air felt suddenly colder. Bianca sat rigid, expression too controlled. Vittorio stood near the window, hands behind his back. Chiara's gaze was lowered. Renier was furious, officers searching corners that did not need searching. Poirot's eyes moved across them all. He did not shout. He did not accuse. He simply said very softly, Someone in this room has just made a second murder attempt. Renier snapped. Attempt? It's just missing evidence. Poirot shook his head. Non, it is not evidence they wanted. He looked each of them in the eye. "It is the truth." And whoever took it was not trying to hide the past anymore. They were trying to control the future. Chapter 7, The Second Thief. Silence fell like a verdict. Poirot stood at the empty table where the tin had rested moments earlier. No raised voices, no frantic gestures, only the stillness that followed a realization too sharp to be ignored. Around him, the Moretti family and Inspector Renier occupied the room like figures in a painting, abruptly stripped of color. "Seal the doors," Renier barked at last. "No one leaves." Constables moved quickly, checking corridors, closing shutters, blocking stairwells. The palazzo answered with echoes and the faint smell of stone dust, as though the building itself were unsettled by the accusation hanging in the air. Poirot did not move. He watched faces. Bianca Moretti's posture was rigid, chin lifted too high, as if outrage could serve as alibi. Vittorio stared out the window, hands clasped behind his back, an old habit of control returning when words failed. Chiara sat motionless, gaze lowered, her stillness almost devotional. Isabella hovered near the doorway, shock and dread etched across her face. Poirot broke the silence gently. "The first thief," he said, "was bold. He killed for the letter. The second thief is subtler. They stole it to prevent the killing from becoming meaningless." Renier turned on him. "Or to finish what the first started?" Poirot nodded. "Possibly." Renier gestured toward the family. "Which one?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Inspector, if I knew already, I would not need you." That did not please Renier, but he swallowed his irritation. "Everyone stays," Renier said. "We search the palazzo room by room." Poirot lifted a finger. "Before you do, allow me to make a small request," Renier sighed. "What now?" "Do not search yet," Poirot replied. "Searching creates noise. Noise destroys patterns." Renier stared at him. "Patterns don't retrieve evidence." Poirot inclined his head. "No, but they reveal thieves." Poirot walked slowly around the room. His steps light, he stopped near the table and bent, examining the floor. "There are no scuff marks," he observed. "No hurried footsteps. Whoever took the tin did not run." Isabella whispered. "Then they weren't afraid." Poirot nodded. "Yes. Fear rushes, confidence strolls." He moved toward the fireplace. The grate was cold now, the ashes undisturbed since earlier. He did not linger. Instead, he turned toward the door to the corridor. "Inspector," Poirot said, "who has moved freely in this palazzo since last night?" Renier frowned. "Staff, family, police," Poirot smiled. "And which of these categories is most invisible?" Renier's eyes narrowed. "Staff." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, but the staff we already suspect Madame Galli was stopped. Her fear betrayed her. The second thief did not fear." Bianca's voice snapped. "Are you accusing us now?" Poirot turned to her calmly. "I am accusing everyone of having motive." Vittorio finally spoke, his voice tired. "Enough riddles. Say what you mean." Poirot nodded. "Very well." He turned toward Chiara. "Madame," he said softly, "you once said the letter should have burned." Chiara's eyes lifted slowly. "Yes," Poirot continued. "You also said you were weak for keeping it." She did not deny it. Poirot leaned slightly forward. "When the tin vanished, you did not react." Chiara met his gaze. "At my age, monsieur, surprise is exhausting." Poirot smiled gently. "Or unnecessary," Bianca cut in sharply. "This is outrageous." Poirot turned to her. "Madame Bianca, when the tin vanished, you were angry but not shocked. Anger often covers relief." Bianca's lips thinned. "You presume too much." Poirot nodded. "I presume nothing, I observe." He turned to Vittorio. "And you, Signor Moretti, you positioned yourself by the window, not to escape, to watch the water." Vittorio stiffened. "The canal is visible from here." "Yes," Poirot said softly. "And the canal is where Matteo Rizzi escaped." A pause. Poirot let it stretch. "You were waiting," Poirot continued, "to see if the thief would flee by water?" Vittorio's jaw tightened. "You think I arranged this?" Poirot shook his head. "No, I think you expected it." Renier slammed his notebook shut. "Enough, I'm searching." Poirot held up a hand. 1 minute more." Renier glared, then grudgingly nodded. Poirot addressed the room. The tin was taken quietly. It was small, metal, and heavy enough to notice if placed in a pocket. Whoever took it knew exactly where it was, and that no one would stop them. Isabella's eyes widened. Someone with authority. Poirot nodded. Authority or immunity, Bianca scoffed. We are not immune to the police. Poirot smiled faintly. Madame, money does not grant immunity. History does. He walked toward the bookshelf again, fingers tracing the spines as before. The first hiding place was here, he said. The second thief would not choose the same place. Thieves are not sentimental. He stepped back, scanning the walls, the ceiling, the furniture. Inspector, Poirot said, how long have your men been posted at the landings? Since this morning, Poirot nodded. And since then, has anyone left by boat? Renier hesitated. No, Poirot smiled. Exactly, Isabella whispered. Then the tin is still inside. Poirot nodded. Yes, but not in a place you would search. He walked toward the large portrait on the far wall, a severe man in ceremonial dress, eyes painted to convey dignity. Who is this? Poirot asked. Vittorio replied stiffly, my great-grandfather. Poirot studied the frame. Heavy! He reached up gently and pressed against the lower edge. The portrait shifted slightly. A hollow sound answered. Renier's eyes widened. You've got to be kidding me! Poirot carefully lifted the frame away. Behind it was a narrow recess, built into the stone, a priest hole of sorts, old and discreet. Inside lay the tin. The room exhaled collectively. Isabella gasped. Grandmother! Chiara closed her eyes. Poirot lifted the tin and set it on the table again. The second thief, he said quietly, did not steal to escape. They stole to hold. Renier rounded on Chiara. You hid it! Chiara opened her eyes. Yes! Bianca cried out. Mamma! Chiara raised a hand. Enough! She looked at Poirot. You were right. I did not want it destroyed, and I did not want it taken. Poirot nodded gently. You wanted control. Chiara's voice trembled. I wanted time. Renier snapped. Time for what? Chiara looked at Isabella. To decide how much truth my granddaughter could survive. Isabella's voice broke. You don't get to decide that. Chiara flinched but did not look away. Poirot stepped between them gently, not as a shield but as a mediator. Madam, he said softly, you believed you could contain this. Chiara nodded. I believed I could outlive it. Poirot sighed. Time is not containment. Renier reached for the tin. I'm opening it. Poirot placed a hand on the lid, firm but calm. Inspector, allow me one more condition. Renier glared. What? We read it together, Poirot said. No whispers, no edits, no private interpretations. Renier hesitated, then nodded. Poirot opened the tin. Inside lay the envelope, aged, yellowed, sealed. Poirot broke the seal carefully and unfolded the paper. He did not read aloud at first. He read silently. His face did not change, but his eyes darkened. Renier leaned forward. Well, Poirot looked up slowly. This letter, he said, is not a confession of illegitimacy. Isabella blinked. Then what is it? Poirot folded the paper once carefully. It is a confession of protection, he said. A bargain struck long ago. A powerful man ensured the Moretti fortune survived a dangerous era, war, scandal, prosecution. In return, the family ensured his name never appeared. Renier frowned. So, he wasn't Isabella's grandfather? Poirot shook his head. No, he was something worse. The room held its breath. He was a criminal financier, Poirot continued. A man whose money laundered reputations, a man whose reach still exists. Through protégés, through loyalists, Isabella whispered. Matteo, Poirot nodded. Matteo was never your family's servant. He was the financier's. Chiara's shoulders sagged. I kept the letter because it named him. Poirot looked at her kindly. And Luca died because he learned the name. Renier's jaw tightened. We can't charge a dead man. Poirot nodded. No, but we can dismantle what remains. He turned to Isabella. The truth will hurt, but it will also free you, Isabella swallowed. From whom? Poirot's gaze shifted toward the canal. From men who believe water can wash blood away. Outside, a siren wailed faintly, boats moving, nets tightening. Poirot folded the letter and placed it back into the tin. "Inspector," he said, "the game has changed." Renier nodded grimly. "We go after the network." Poirot smiled faintly. "Yes." He looked once more at the family, fractured, exposed, human. "And now," he added quietly, "we wait to see what Matteo Rizzi does when he realizes the truth has not drowned." Chapter 8. The net tightens on the water. By late afternoon, the canal had changed its character. Where it once flowed with easy indifference, carrying tourists, traders, and gossip, it now moved with tension beneath its surface. Police launches cut through the water at measured intervals. Plainclothes officers leaned from balconies and bridges, eyes scanning reflections as much as reality. Nets were not thrown yet, but everyone sensed they soon would be. Hercule Poirot stood at the palazzo's balcony, hands clasped behind his back, watching the choreography unfold. "The water," he murmured, "is never innocent. It remembers everything that passes over it." Inspector Renier joined him, face grim. "We've alerted every patrol. Matteo Rizzi can't leave the city by water without being seen." Poirot nodded mildly. "Unless he is not leaving," Renier frowned. "You think he's staying?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I think he is waiting. Men like Rizzi do not flee until they know whether the ground beneath them has truly collapsed." Behind them, inside the palazzo, the Moretti household was in quiet disarray. Servants whispered behind closed doors. Bianca Moretti had retreated to her room, equal parts fury and fear, driving her isolation. Vittorio sat with his lawyer, voice low, already thinking in terms of damage control. Chiara remained seated in the same armchair, unmoving, as though motion itself might invite consequences. Isabella alone moved freely. She crossed the marble floor and joined Poirot at the balcony. "They're all afraid now," she said softly. Poirot inclined his head. "Fear is honest. It tells us where power truly lies." Isabella watched a police boat glide beneath the bridge. "I used to believe our family was protected, untouchable." Poirot's voice was gentle. "Protection purchased with silence is never permanent." She hesitated. "What happens next?" Poirot turned toward her. "Now we see who believes they can still control the canal." Matteo Rizzi had not gone far. He guided his boat into a narrow side canal where the buildings leaned inward, their upper stories nearly touching. Here the water was darker, the sunlight fractured into broken shards. The city pressed close, intimate and conspiratorial. Matteo rested the oar and listened. Police sirens echoed faintly, voices carried across water. The net was tightening just as Poirot had predicted. Matteo exhaled slowly. This was not panic. Panic belonged to amateurs. He reached beneath the seat and retrieved a small cloth-wrapped object. Inside lay a second ring, simpler than the onyx one, but heavier with meaning. He slipped it onto his finger and removed the first ring, pocketing it. Symbols mattered, especially when one needed to disappear. Matteo's thoughts returned to the letter. It should have been gone by now, burned, dissolved into ash and smoke and irrelevance. But Poirot had intervened. Poirot always intervened. Matteo's jaw tightened. The financier would not forgive this delay. The network did not tolerate exposure, especially not exposure that came wrapped in names and signatures. Matteo pushed off gently, letting the current carry him deeper into the city's veins. Back at the palazzo, Poirot gathered the principals once more. Inspector Renier stood nearby, arms crossed, listening with professional suspicion. Poirot addressed Isabella first. "Mademoiselle, you must understand something important. Matteo is not acting alone, not in spirit, not in purpose." Isabella nodded. "He's loyal to the financier." "Yes," Poirot said, "but loyalty is not affection. It is debt." Vittorio snapped from across the room. "What difference does it make? Catch him! Arrest him!" Poirot turned calmly. "Arresting Matteo is not enough. If he is arrested without context, he becomes a martyr, or worse, a silence." Renier scowled. "I don't like riddles." Poirot smiled politely. "Then you will not like criminals, Inspector. They love them." Poirot continued. "We must give Matteo a reason to act, to reveal himself." Isabella frowned. "How?" Poirot tapped the tin gently. "By making him believe the letter will be made public." Chiara stirred. "You would destroy us." Poirot met her gaze. "Madame, the letter has already destroyed a man." What remains is honesty, or more blood. A heavy silence followed. Then Chiara nodded slowly. "Do it!" Bianca burst out. "Mamma!" Chiara raised her hand. "Enough hiding. I am tired." Poirot inclined his head respectfully. "Then we will proceed carefully." Renier leaned forward. "Carefully how?" Poirot smiled faintly. "With bait." As dusk fell, the city shifted again. Lights bloomed along the canals, reflections trembling like nerves. A discreet rumor began to circulate, not shouted, not printed, but whispered through the channels that mattered. A letter existed, a letter that named a man, a letter that would be read. Soon, the rumor reached cafes and private clubs, gondoliers and doormen, couriers and fixers, and inevitably, it reached Matteo Rizzi. He heard it from a man who sold him cigarettes without asking questions. "They say the letter's real," the man muttered. "They say it's going to the police, names and all." Matteo said nothing. He paid and left. But inside, the calculation shifted. If the letter was read publicly, the financier's shadow would become visible. The network would respond violently, and Matteo would be blamed for failure. Failure was not survivable. Matteo turned his boat toward the old customs warehouse, a place long abandoned, its stone arches crumbling into the water. It was there the financier's men once met, long ago. It was there Matteo had been told to go if everything went wrong, and everything had gone wrong. Poirot waited. He did not accompany the police. He did not hover near radios or maps. He sat instead in a quiet room overlooking the canal, sipping tea that had long since cooled. Isabella paced. Renier stood at the window, tension radiating from him. "You're sure?" Renier asked for the third time. Poirot nodded. "Oui, Matteo will go where he believes control once lived." A shout echoed from outside. Renier turned sharply as a constable burst in. "Sir! Movement near the old customs warehouse, boat matching Rizzi's description." Renier grabbed his coat. "Move, now!" Poirot rose calmly. "I will come." Renier frowned. "It's dangerous." Poirot smiled faintly. "Dangerous men behave predictably." The warehouse loomed like a broken tooth against the darkening sky. Police boats approached silently, engines low, officers spread out, shadows among shadows. Matteo stood inside, the water lapping against stone pillars. He held a small packet in his hand, not the letter, but a blade wrapped in cloth. Insurance, always insurance. Footsteps echoed. Matteo turned. Poirot stepped into the open space, hands visible, posture calm. "You are alone," Matteo said. Poirot nodded. "Inspector Renier is nearby, but this moment is between us." Matteo laughed softly. "You think I will confess?" Poirot shook his head. "No, I think you will explain." Matteo's eyes narrowed. "Explain what?" Poirot stepped closer. "Why Luca Varini had to die?" Matteo's expression hardened. "He was careless." Poirot nodded. "Yes, and curiosity is dangerous." Matteo's jaw clenched. "The letter named a man who saved this city from chaos, from ruin." Poirot's voice remained steady. "By becoming its hidden master." Matteo's eyes flashed. "Order requires authority." Poirot replied gently. "Order without accountability is tyranny." Matteo lunged, not wildly, precisely. Poirot moved just enough. A shout rang out, lights flared, police surged forward. Matteo froze, surrounded. Inspector Renier's voice cut through the chaos. "Drop it!" Matteo looked at Poirot one last time. "You haven't won," he said quietly. Poirot inclined his head. "No, I have only stopped you." Matteo released the blade. It clattered against stone. The canal outside rippled, reflecting blue lights and broken stars. As Matteo was taken away, Poirot exhaled softly. "The net," he murmured, "has closed." But as he looked toward the dark water, Poirot knew something still lingered beneath the surface. The financier, the shadow. And shadows, once disturbed, did not disappear quietly. Chapter 9, The Name That Refused to Stay Buried. The arrest of Matteo Rizzi did not bring relief. It brought movement. By dawn, the city was humming with a nervous energy that had nothing to do with commerce or romance. Whispers slipped from cafe to cafe, from back offices to private salons. Doors that had been closed for years opened quietly. Phone calls were made in careful tones. Men who had once believed themselves invisible began to reconsider the shadows they trusted. And at the center of it all was a single thing that still had not been spoken aloud: a name. Hercule Poirot understood this better than anyone. He stood in a modest police office overlooking the canal, far from the opulence of the Moretti Palazzo. The choice was deliberate. Grand rooms encouraged performance, small rooms encouraged honesty. Inspector Renier paced like a caged animal. "We have Rizzi," Renier said. "We have the weapon. We have witness timelines. But without the name in that letter, the network stays intact." Poirot nodded gently. "Yes, we have caught the hand, not the head." Renier stopped pacing. "Then we read the letter. Now." Poirot folded his hands. "Inspector, once a name is spoken, it cannot be unsaid. It will not only implicate the guilty, it will implicate the protected." Renier leaned on the desk. "This isn't politics, this is murder." Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice did not. "Inspector, murder is always political when power is involved." Isabella arrived shortly after. She looked different now, not calmer, stronger. Something in her posture had shifted since the warehouse. Fear still lived in her eyes, but it no longer ruled them. "You sent for me," she said. Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, mademoiselle, because what comes next concerns you most of all." Renier folded his arms. "If we read that letter, your family name will be dragged through every paper in Europe." Isabella did not hesitate. "Read it." Renier blinked. "You're sure?" "Yes," she said, "because if we don't, Luca's death means nothing, and Matteo becomes just another man who acted alone." Poirot watched her carefully, then smiled faintly. "Courage," he said, "often arrives disguised as exhaustion." He turned to the tin on the desk. Slowly, deliberately, Poirot removed the letter and unfolded it. This time he read aloud, not dramatically, not emotionally, but with the precision of a surgeon exposing a wound that had been festering for decades. "Chiara, you asked for protection, and I have given it. The funds have been routed, the investigations redirected, the inconvenient questions silenced. In return, my name must never appear. Not in records, not in memory, not even in confession. Your family will prosper because it stands on my silence. Break it, and everything collapses." Gibelos. The room seemed to shrink. Renier's face tightened. "E.L.?" Poirot nodded. "Initials," Isabella whispered. "Who is he?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he refolded the letter carefully and placed it back on the desk. Then he spoke. "A financier," he said. "A man who built influence not through visibility, but through proximity. He funded shipping lines, political campaigns, reconstruction projects after wars. He never signed anything himself." Renier's voice was tense. "Is he alive?" Poirot nodded. "Very much so. Older now, quieter, but still powerful." Isabella's hands clenched. "And he ordered Luca's death?" Poirot shook his head. "No, Luca died because he threatened to expose the wrong name. Rizzi acted to contain damage." Renier frowned. "On whose orders?" Poirot met his gaze. "That is the question." They questioned Matteo Rizzi again that afternoon. The room was bare, stone walls, a single table. Matteo sat with his hands folded, his expression calm in the way only men who had already accepted consequences could be. Poirot entered alone. Matteo smiled faintly. "You found the letter?" Poirot sat opposite him. "Yes," Matteo tilted his head. "Did you read it?" "Yes," Matteo exhaled. "Then you know." Poirot nodded. "I know the initials, and I know why you were loyal." Matteo's eyes sharpened. "Loyalty is not the word." Poirot studied him. "Then what is?" Matteo's jaw tightened. "Survival." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about E.L." Matteo laughed softly. "You already know enough." Poirot's voice was calm. "Not about you." That landed. Matteo's smile faded. "You were trained," Poirot continued. "You were placed, you were rewarded, but never truly free. You believed you were protecting order." Matteo looked away. Poirot pressed gently. "Who gave the final instruction regarding Luca Varini?" Matteo was silent. Poirot waited. Finally, Matteo spoke quietly. "No one told me to kill him." Poirot nodded. "Then why did you?" Matteo's eyes flickered. Because if the name became public, others would act, louder, messier. Innocence would suffer. Poirot tilted his head. So you chose a clean solution. Yes, Poirot sighed. Clean murders are the most dangerous kind. Matteo's voice hardened. You don't understand how many lives that man's money saved. Poirot's gaze was steady. And you don't understand how many it controlled. Matteo said nothing. Poirot rose. You will testify, Matteo laughed bitterly. About what? Initials? Rumors? The man has buried deeper truths than this letter. Poirot paused at the door. Truth, he said softly, does not need to be complete to be effective. It only needs to be believable. Matteo looked up sharply. That evening the city received its shock, not through headlines, through withdrawals. Accounts were frozen, donations paused, invitations rescinded, names quietly removed from boards and committees. The initials EL began to circulate in places that mattered, not as accusation, but as risk. And risk frightened powerful men far more than guilt. Renier watched the reports come in, astonished. You didn't arrest him. You didn't even name him publicly. Poirot smiled faintly. I did something worse. Renier frowned. What? I made him inconvenient. At the palazzo, Chiara Moretti sat alone with Isabella. The old woman looked suddenly very tired. I thought silence was protection, Chiara said quietly. Isabella replied, It was a cage. Chiara nodded. And cages always rust. Isabella took her grandmother's hand. We'll face this together. Chiara closed her eyes. Good. I am done being afraid of dead men. Late that night, Poirot stood once more by the canal. The water moved as it always had, indifferent, reflective, patient. Renier joined him. So that's it? No dramatic arrest of the mastermind? Poirot smiled gently. Inspector, some men are punished by losing control, not freedom. Renier shook his head. You let him walk, Poirot replied softly. No, I let him fall. Renier watched the water for a long moment. Will he strike back? Poirot considered. No, he will retreat. Shadows do that when exposed to light. Renier exhaled. And the Morettis? Poirot turned away from the canal. They will rebuild, this time without borrowed silence. As Poirot walked away, the starlit canal reflected not blood, but movement. The city breathed again, but one chapter remained, because even when power retreats, consequences must still be faced, and that, Poirot knew, was the final act. Chapter 10, Blood washes away, truth does not. The canal looked ordinary again. That, Poirot thought, was the most unsettling part. Morning light slid across the water in pale bands, breaking against stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. Gondoliers called out lazily, their voices carrying the familiar cadence of a city returning to itself. Cups clinked in cafes, shutters opened. Life, persistent and stubborn, reclaimed the stage. Only those who had watched the water closely these past days knew how deceptive that calm was. Hercule Poirot stood on the same bridge where, not long ago, police lights had fractured the night. He rested his hands on the cool stone parapet, gazing down as though the canal might still whisper secrets to him. Blood washes away, he murmured, but truth stains. Behind him, footsteps approached, unhurried, respectful. Inspector Renier stopped beside him. They're transferring Rizi today, high security. Poirot nodded. Good. Renier hesitated. You know the papers will be furious. No headline villain, no dramatic fall. Poirot smiled faintly. The newspapers prefer theatre. Justice prefers silence. Renier looked out at the water. And the financier? Poirot did not answer immediately. He watched a ripple expand, then disappear. He will live, Poirot said at last. But he will live smaller. Renier snorted softly. That's not very satisfying. Poirot turned to him. Inspector, satisfaction is not the measure of resolution. Balance is. Renier considered this, then sighed. You always say that. And yet, Poirot replied gently, you always see it work. At the Moretti Palazzo, the air had changed. Not lighter. Honesty was heavy but clearer. Furniture had been rearranged, curtains drawn back, windows open to allow sound and wind and rumor inside. Servants moved without whispering now, as though the house itself had decided secrecy was no longer fashionable. Isabella stood in the former sitting room where Luca Varini had died. The stain was gone, scrubbed until the floor gleamed. Still, she knew exactly where it had been. Some knowledge could not be polished away. Poirot joined her quietly. "I wanted to see it once more," she said, "before we changed the room." Poirot inclined his head. "A wise instinct." She turned to him. "Everyone keeps asking me if I'm relieved." Poirot smiled softly. "And are you?" Isabella considered. "No, I'm awake." Poirot's eyes warmed. "That is better." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been circling her thoughts for days. "Do you think Luca deserved to die?" Poirot did not evade it. "No," he said. "He deserved to be stopped. Death was chosen by someone who believed control mattered more than consequence." Isabella nodded slowly. "Matteo." "Yes." "And the man behind him?" Poirot's expression remained calm. "He deserved to be seen." Isabella exhaled. "Even if he's never named." Poirot met her gaze. "Names are powerful, but sometimes removing their power is the greater punishment." In a quiet interview room across the city, Matteo Rizzi sat alone. The confidence that had once wrapped him like armor was gone now, not shattered, but set aside. He stared at the wall as if measuring distances that no longer mattered. Poirot entered without ceremony. Matteo looked up. "You came to say goodbye?" Poirot sat opposite him. "I came to say thank you." Matteo frowned. "For murder?" Poirot shook his head. "For telling the truth when it mattered." Matteo laughed bitterly. "Truth? You never even said his name." Poirot folded his hands. "And yet you know it no longer protects him." Matteo looked away. "You think this changes anything?" Poirot's voice was gentle. "It changes you." Matteo's jaw tightened. "I did what I thought was necessary." Poirot nodded. "Yes, and necessity is the most dangerous justification of all." Matteo said nothing. Poirot rose. "Your sentence will be heavy, but not as heavy as the life you were living." Matteo finally looked up. "You think prison is freedom?" Poirot paused at the door. "I think it is the first place you will sleep without orders." He left Matteo with that thought. That evening the letter was archived, not burned, not displayed. Archived, sealed, catalogued, protected by law rather than fear. Inspector Renier signed the final document with a weary flourish. "It's done," Poirot nodded. "As much as such things ever are." Renier leaned back. "You could have ended this with fireworks." Poirot smiled faintly. "Fireworks fade. Quiet consequences endure." Renier studied him. "Will you stay in the city?" Poirot shook his head. "No, the canal no longer needs me." On his final night, Poirot took one last walk along the water. Lanterns trembled in reflection. A couple laughed on a bridge. Somewhere, a violin played badly and with great confidence. The city breathed, imperfect and alive. Isabella joined him, coat wrapped tight against the evening chill. "We're opening the palazzo to the public," she said. "Charity exhibitions, no more closed doors." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Light is an excellent disinfectant." She smiled. "I suppose I owe you everything." Poirot shook his head. "You owe yourself honesty." She hesitated. "Will the past ever stop following us?" Poirot considered the question carefully. "No," he said at last, "but it will stop leading." They stood in silence, watching the water. Poirot spoke once more, softly, as if to the canal itself. "Blood washes away, truth does not. And when truth is allowed to remain, the water remembers nothing." Isabella watched him go, his small figure disappearing into the crowd with the ease of a man who carried no secrets that were not his own. The canal flowed on, and this time it carried only light.